Heraclitus of Ephesus was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, a native of the Greek city Ephesus, Ionia, on the coast of Asia Minor. He was of distinguished parentage. Little is known about his early life and education, but he regarded himself as self-taught and a pioneer of wisdom. From the lonely life he led, and still more from the apparently riddled and allegedly paradoxical nature of his philosophy and his stress upon the needless unconsciousness of humankind, he was called the obscure and the weeping philosopher. Heraclitus was famous for his insistence on ever-present change as being the fundamental essence of the universe, as stated in the famous saying, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." This position was complemented by his stark commitment to a unity of opposites in the world, stating that the path up and down are one and the same. Through these doctrines, Heraclitus characterized all existing entities by pairs of contrary properties, whereby no entity may ever occupy a single state at a single time. This, along with his cryptic utterance that all entities come to be in accordance with this logos, has been the subject of numerous interpretations. Life. The main source for the life of Heraclitus is Diogenes Laertius, although some have questioned the validity of his account as a tissue of Hellenistic anecdotes, most of them obviously fabricated on the basis of statements in the preserved fragments. Diogenes said that Heraclitus flourished in the 69th Olympiad, 504–501 BCE. All the rest of the evidence, the people Heraclitus is said to have known, or the people who were familiar with his work, confirms the flaw-root. His dates of birth and death are based on a lifespan of 60 years, the age at which Diogenes says he died, with the flaw root in the middle. Heraclitus was born to an aristocratic family in Ephesus, Anatolia, in what is now called present-day Ephes, Turkey. His father was named either Bloson or Heracon. Diogenes says that he abdicated the kingship in favor of his brother, and Strabo confirms that there was a ruling family in Ephesus descended from the Ionian founder, Androclus, which still kept the title and could sit in the chief seat of the games, as well as a few other privileges. How much power the king had is another question. Ephesus had been part of the Persian Empire since 547 and was ruled by a satrap, a more distant figure, as the great king allowed the Ionians considerable autonomy. Diogenes says that Heraclitus used to play knuckle-bones with the youths in the temple of Artemis, and when asked to start making laws he refused, saying that the constitution was ponera, which can mean either that it was fundamentally wrong or that he considered it toilsome. Two extant letters between Heraclitus and Darius I, quoted by Diogenes, are undoubtedly later forgeries. With regard to education, Diogenes says that Heraclitus was wondrous from childhood. Diogenes relates that Sotion said he was a hearer of Xenophanes, which contradicts Heraclitus' statement that he had taught himself by questioning himself. Burnet states in any case that Xenophanes left Ionia before Heraclitus was born. Diogenes relates that as a boy Heraclitus had said he knew nothing, but later claimed to know everything. His statement that he heard no one, but questioned himself, can be placed alongside his statement that the things that can be seen, heard and learned are what I prize the most. Diogenes relates that Heraclitus had a poor opinion of human affairs. He believed that Hesiod and Pythagoras lacked understanding, though learned, and that Homer and Archilochus deserved to be beaten. Laws needed to be defended as though they were city walls. Timon is said to have called him a mob reviler. Heraclitus hated the Athenians and his fellow Ephesians, wishing the latter wealth in punishment for their wicked ways, says Diogenes. Finally, he became a hater of his kind and wandered the mountains, making his diet of grass and herbs. Heraclitus' life as a philosopher was interrupted by dropsy. The physicians he consulted were unable to prescribe a cure. He treated himself with a liniment of cow manure and baking in the sun, believing that this method would remove the fluid. After a day of treatment he died and was interred in the marketplace. Works. Diogenes states that Heraclitus' work was a continuous treatise on nature, but was divided into 3 discourses, one on the universe, another on politics, and a third on theology. Theophrastus says, some parts of his work are half-finished, while other parts made a strange medley. Diogenes also tells us that Heraclitus deposited his book as a dedication in the great temple of Artemis. The Artemisium, one of the largest temples of the 6th century BCE and one of the 9 wonders of the ancient world. Ancient temples were regularly used for storing treasures, and were open to private individuals under exceptional circumstances. Furthermore, many subsequent philosophers in this period refer to the work, says Kahn, down to the time of Plutarch and Clement, if not later. The little book of Heraclitus was available in its original form to any reader who chose to seek it out. Diogenes says, the book acquired such fame that it produced partisans of his philosophy who were called Heracliteans, as with other pre-Socratics. His writings survive now only in fragments quoted by other authors. Ancient characterizations. The obscure. At some time in antiquity he acquired this epithet denoting that his major sayings were difficult to understand. According to Diogenes Laertius, Timon of Phlius called him the Riddler, and explained that Heraclitus wrote his book rather unclearly, so that only the capable should attempt it. By the time of Cicero he had become the Dark, because he had spoken nimus obscure too obscurely concerning nature, and had done so deliberately in order to be misunderstood. The customary English translation of sigma kappa omicron tau epsilon iota nu omicron sigma follows the Latin. The obscure, the weeping philosopher. Diogenes Laertius ascribes the theory that Heraclitus did not complete some of his works because of melancholia to Theophrastus. Later he was referred to as the laughing philosopher, as opposed to Democritus, who is known as the weeping philosopher, if Stobaeus writes correctly. Sotion in the early 1st century CE was already combining the two in the imaginative duo of weeping and laughing philosophers. Among the wise, instead of anger, Heraclitus was overtaken by tears, Democritus by laughter. The view is expressed by the satirist Juvenal. The first of prayers, best known at all the temples, is mostly for riches. Seeing this, then do you not commend the one sage Democritus for laughing, and the master of the other school Heraclitus for his tears? The motif was also adopted by Lucian of Samosata in his Sale of Creeds, in which the duo is sold together as a complementary product in the satirical auction of philosophers. Subsequently they were considered an indispensable feature of philosophic landscapes. Montaigne proposed 2 archetypical views of human affairs based on them, selecting Democritus for himself. The weeping philosopher may have been mentioned in William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. Donato Bramante painted a fresco, Democritus and Heraclitus, in Casa Panigarala in Milan. Philosophy. Logos. The idea that all things come to pass in accordance with this logos, and the logos is common, is expressed in 2 famous but obscure fragments. This logos holds always, but humans always prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. For though all things come to be in accordance with this logos, humans are like the inexperienced when they experience such words and deeds as I set out, distinguishing each in accordance with its nature and saying how it is. But other people fail to notice what they do when awake, just as they forget what they do while asleep. For this reason it is necessary to follow what is common. But although the logos is common, most people live as if they had their own private understanding. The meaning of logos also is subject to interpretation. Word, account, principle, plan, formula, measure, proportion, reckoning, though Heraclitus quite deliberately plays on the various meanings of logos. There is no compelling reason to suppose that he used it in a special technical sense, significantly different from the way it was used in ordinary Greek of his time. The later Stoics understood it as the account which governs everything, and Hippolytus, in the 3rd century CE, identified it as meaning the Christian word of God. Panterai, everything flows, pi alpha nu tau alpha epsilon, everything flows, either was spoken by Heraclitus or survived as a quotation of his. This famous aphorism used to characterize Heraclitus' thought comes from Simplicius, a Neoplatonist, and from Plato's Cratylus. The word rai is the Greek word for to stream, and is etymologically related to ria according to Plato's Cratylus. The philosophy of Heraclitus is summed up in his cryptic utterance: pi omicron tau alpha mu omicron sigma iota tau omicron sigma iota nu alpha tau omicron sigma iota nu mu beta alpha iota nu omicron epsilon sigma iota nu tau epsilon rho alpha kappa alpha tau epsilon rho alpha delta alpha tau alpha pi iota rho epsilon. Potamwazi tashin auto ashinam banazan. Heterakai hetera hudata epere avenue waters flow on those who step into the same rivers. The quote from Heraclitus appears in Plato's Cratylus twice, in 401 Dias. Tau nu tau alpha epsilon nu alpha iota tau epsilon pi alpha nu tau alpha kappa alpha mu epsilon iota nu omicron delta epsilon nu ta onto an 8 pantachimenine ouden. All entities move and nothing remains still, and in 402a pi alpha nu tau alpha chi omega rho epsilon kappa alpha omicron delta nu mu epsilon iota kappa alpha delta sigma tau nu alpha tau nu pi omicron tau alpha mu nu omicron kappa nu mu beta alpha iota eta sigma pantachoria chi auden manei chidus est tan norton potamon aucanim bis. Everything changes and nothing remains still, and you cannot step twice into the same stream. Instead of flow, Plato uses choria to change place. The assertions of flow are coupled in many fragments with the enigmatic river image. Pi omicron tau alpha mu omicron sigma tau omicron sigma alpha tau omicron sigma mu beta alpha iota nu omicron mu epsilon nu tau epsilon kappa alpha omicron kappa mu beta alpha iota nu omicron mu epsilon nu tau epsilon kappa alpha omicron kappa epsilon mu epsilon nu. We both step and do not step in the same rivers. We are and are not. Compare with the Latin adages omnia mutantur and tempora mutantur and the Japanese tale Hojoki, which contains the same image of the changing river, and the central Buddhist doctrine of impermanence. Hodos anno Kato, the way up and the way down, in delta sigma nu omega kappa alpha tau omega. The structure anno Kato is more accurately translated as a hyphenated word. The upward-downward path, they go on simultaneously and instantaneously and result in hidden harmony. A way is a series of transformations. The pi epsilon rho sigma tau rho omicron pi alpha, turnings of fire, first into sea, then half of sea to earth and half to rarefied air. The transformation is a replacement of one element by another. The death of fire is the birth of air, and the death of air is the birth of water. This world, which is the same for all, no one of gods or men has made, but it always was and will be, an ever-living fire, with measures of it kindling, and measures going out. This latter phraseology is further elucidated. All things are an interchange for fire, and fire for all things, just like goods for gold and gold for goods. Heraclitus considered fire as the most fundamental element. He believed fire gave rise to the other elements and thus to all things. He regarded the soul as being a mixture of fire and water, with fire being the noble part of the soul, and water the ignoble part. A soul should therefore aim toward becoming more full of fire and less full of water. A dry soul was best. According to Heraclitus, worldly pleasures made the soul moist, and he considered mastering one's worldly desires to be a noble pursuit which purified the soul's fire. Norman Melchert interpreted Heraclitus as using fire, metaphorically, in lieu of logos, as the origin of all things. Dicaris, strife is justice, if objects are new from moment to moment so that one can never touch the same object twice. Then each object must dissolve and be generated continually momentarily in an object as a harmony between a building up and a tearing down. Heraclitus calls the oppositional processes rho iota sigma eris, strife, and hypothesizes that the apparently stable state, delta iota kappa eta dike, or justice, is a harmony of it. We must know that war is common to all and strife is justice, and that all things come into being through strife necessarily. As Diogenes explains, all things come into being by conflict of opposites, and the sum of things flows like a stream. In the bow metaphor, Heraclitus compares the resultant to a strung beheld in shape by an equilibrium of the string tension and spring action of the bow. There is a harmony in the bending back as in the case of the bow and the lyre. Hepastitokoino, follow the common. People must follow the common, and not live having their own judgment. He distinguishes between human laws and divine law. By God, Heraclitus does not mean the Judeo-Christian version of a single God as primum mobile of all things, God as creator, but the divine as opposed to human, the immortal as opposed to the mortal, the cyclical as opposed to the transient. It is more accurate to speak of the God, and not of God. He removes the human sense of justice from his concept of God, i.e., humanity is not the image of God. To God all things are fair and good and just, but people hold some things wrong and some right. God's custom has wisdom, but human custom does not. And yet both humans and God are childish. Human opinions of children's toys, and eternity as a child moving counters in a game. The kingly power is a child's. Wisdom is to know the thought by which all things are steered through all things, which must not imply that people are or can be wise. Only Zeus is wise. To some degree then Heraclitus seems to be in the mystic's position of urging people to follow God's plan without much of an idea what that may be. In fact, there is a note of despair. The fairest universe is but a heap of rubbish piled up at random. Ethos anthropoidaimon. Character is fate. This influential quote by Heraclitus, theta omicron sigma nu theta rho omega pi delta alpha iota mu omega nu, has led to numerous interpretations. Whether in this context, daimon can indeed be translated to mean fate is disputed. However, it lends much sense to Heraclitus' observations and conclusions about human nature in general. While the translation with fate is generally accepted as incarns, a man's character is his divinity, in some cases, it may also stand for the soul of the departed.